So I'll share my screen. Okay. Can someone confirm if you're able to see my screen?
We can see it, Prabhu.
Okay, and you're seeing Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.6?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so today we'll be discussing from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, second chapter, verse number 6. I just picked it up because this is one of my favorite verses. So since I was given a choice, I just decided to go with it. So I'll start with the verse and you all can recite after me. Savai pumsam paro dharmo
Savai pumsam paro dharmo
yato bhaktir adhokshaje
yato bhaktiradhokshaje
ahaituki apratihata
ahaitokya pratihata
yatma suprasidati
yayatma suprasidati
savai pumsam paro dharmo
savai pumsam paro dharmo
yato bhaktir adhokshaje
yato bhaktiradhokshaje
ahaituki apratihata
ahaitokya pratihata
yayatma suprasidati
yayatma suprasidati
savai pumsam paro dharmo
savai pumsam paro dharmo
yato bhaktir adhokshaje
yato bhaktiradhokshaje
ahaituki apratihata
ahaitokya pratihata
yayatma suprasidati.
yayatma suprasidati.
Someone like to chant?
Savai pumsam paro dharmo
Savai pumsam
paro dharmo
yato bhaktir adhokshaje
yato bhaktir adhokshaje
adhokshaje
ahaituki apratihata
ahaituki
apritihata
yayatma suprasidati.
yayatma
yatma suprasidati. savai pumsam paro dharmo
Savai pumsam paro dharmo
yato bhaktir adhokshaje
yato
yato bhaktiradhokshaje
ahaitoki aprihata
ahaituki
ahaitokya pratihata
yayatma supradati.
yayatma suprasidati. Savai pumsam paro dharmo
savai pumsam
pumsam paro dharmo
yato bhaktiradhokshaje
yato bhaktir adhokshaje
ahaitokya pratihata
ahaituki
apratihata
apratihata
yayatma suprasidati.
yayatma
yayatma
suprasidati.
suprasidati.
Okay, synonyms. Sah,
Sah,
that.
that,
Why,
why,
certainly.
certainly.
Pumsam,
Pumsam,
for mankind.
for mankind.
Parah,
Paraha,
sublime.
sublime.
Dharma,
Dharma,
occupation.
occupation.
Yatah,
Yataha,
by which.
by which.
Bhakti,
Bhakti,
devotional service.
devotional service.
Adhokshaje,
Adhokshaji,
unto the transcendence.
unto the transcendent.
Ahaituki,
Ahaitaki,
causeless.
causeless.
Apratihata,
Apratihata,
unbroken.
unbroken.
Yaya,
Yaya,
by which,
by
by
which
Atma,
Atma,
the self,
the
the
self,
self,
suprasidati,
supersedati,
completely satisfied.
completely satisfied.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The supreme occupation, dharma, for all humanity is that by which men can attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. Purport. In this statement, Sri Suta Goswami answers the first question of sages of Naimisharanya. The sages asked him to summarize the whole range of revealed scriptures and present the most essential part so that fallen people or the people in general might easily take it up. The Vedas prescribe two different types of occupation for the human being. One is called the Pravritti Marg, or the path of sense enjoyment, and the other is called the Nivritti Marg, or the path of renunciation. The path of enjoyment is inferior, and the path of sacrifice for the supreme cause is superior. The material existence of the living being is a diseased condition of actual life. Actual life is spiritual existence, or Brahma Bhuta existence, where life is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. Material existence is temporary, illusory, and full of miseries. There is no happiness at all. There is just a futile attempt to get rid of the miseries, and temporary cessation of misery is falsely called happiness. Therefore, the path of progressive material enjoyment, which is temporary, miserable, and illusory, is inferior. But devotional service to the Supreme Lord, which leads one to eternal, blissful, and all cognizant life, is called the superior quality of occupation. This is sometimes polluted when mixed with the inferior quality. For example, adoption of devotional service for material gain is certainly an obstruction to the progressive path of renunciation. Renunciation or abdication for ultimate good is certainly a better occupation than enjoyment in the diseased condition of life. Such enjoyment only aggravates the symptoms of disease and increases its duration. Therefore, devotional service to the Lord must be pure in quality, that is, without the least desire for material enjoyment. One should, therefore, accept the superior quality of occupation in the form of the devotional service of the Lord, without any tinge of unnecessary desire, fruitive action, and philosophical speculation. This alone can lead one to the perpetual solace in his service. We have purposely denoted dharma as occupation because the root meaning of the word dharma is that which sustains one's existence. A living being's sustenance of existence is to coordinate his activities with his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord Krishna. Krishna is the central pivot of living beings, and he is the all-attractive living entity or eternal form amongst all other living beings or eternal forms. Each and every living being has his eternal form in the spiritual existence, and Krishna is the eternal attraction for all of them. Krishna is the complete whole, and everything else is his part and parcel. The relation is one of the servant and the served. It is transcendental and is completely distinct from our experience in material existence. This relation of servant and the served is the most congenial form of intimacy. One can realize it as devotional service progresses. Everyone should engage himself in that transcendental loving service of the Lord, even in the present condition state of material existence. That will gradually give one the clue to actual life and please him to complete satisfaction. नमः विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय So here in this verse, this is basically spoken by Sri Sutta Goswami, right? So this comes in the first canto, second chapter, and this is the sixth verse. So as we know, in Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, first chapter, the sages who are all gathered in Naimisharanya, right? They are asking all kinds of questions from Srila Sutta Goswami, and these questions are not of the usual kind, right? As Sutta Goswami says in the previous verse, all of these questions that the sages ask are actually for the ultimate welfare of the entire creation, right? And in response to those questions, this is one of the very first verses that Srila Sutta Goswami speaks. In fact, immediately after paying obeisances, this is one of the very first verses that Sri Sutta Goswami speaks in response to those questions, right? And as is the case with transcendental beings, right? They're very, very intelligent, right? So, Sutta Goswami, in his one of the very first response, kind of captures the entire essence of the perfect knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam, right? So just by looking at this verse, right? Suppose if a person, decides to read Srimad Bhagavatam and, of course, is not able to move beyond this verse, but even if he reaches up to this verse and he reads this verse, he will basically get the complete purport of the perfect knowledge, right? And this verse is structured in such a beautiful way, right, that it answers the very, very fundamental question, right? So just like in any investigation, there are 5 W's and 1 H, right? Why, where, who, which, what, and how. So if we look at this verse very carefully, it basically answers all of the important questions, right? So it starts with Save Pumsam Paro Dharmo, right? So what is the topmost occupational duty that is prescribed for the living entities, right? So what is the first thing, right? What should we do? Essentially, in simple terms, here, Sutta Goswami is basically prescribing an answer to the question that what should we all do, right? Basically, occupational duty, right, or dharma, which here is described as occupation, right, as Prabhupada says. Occupation essentially relates with that with which we can maintain ourselves, right? So anything that we do in this material world, right, for our maintenance, the activities basically, right? So those are our occupations. So what should be our occupation, right? What should be the ultimate occupation, right? That's the question that all of us at one point have asked and should ask, basically, right? Because all of us in this material world are engaged in some or the other form of activity, right? And all of the activities or the occupational duties that we do, there is an objective behind it, right? So this is a very, very relevant question that all of us should ask, that what is it that we should do, right? And why is it that we should engage in occupational duty, right? So what and why? So the answer to that question is actually the very last line of this verse, right? Yayatma suprasidati. So the occupational duty in which we engage should be such that can give complete satisfaction to ourselves, right? Atma means self, right? Yaya means by which, and suprasidati means completely satisfied, right? So prasidati means satisfaction, and when we add su to it, that's like a superlative, right? So although we see that in this material world, whatever activities that we are engaged in, right, whatever occupation we may be doing, the ultimate objective is satisfaction, right? We want satisfaction or happiness out of it. But the nature of the happiness that we get in this material world, as all of us must have observed, is such that we will get some satisfaction for a very limited amount of time, right? And then it gets exhausted, and then we want to move on to something else that can again give us satisfaction, right? So whatever occupation we may do, the satisfaction that comes out of it is temporary, and that is the very nature of it. But if we look very deeply, we are always needing satisfaction. It's not like we get happiness for, let's say a moment and that's it. We can stay satisfied forever, right? We want to stay in that state of blissfulness completely and eternally. That is what we all are seeking. But whatever occupation we are engaged in this material world, the nature of happiness that comes out of it through our material engagements is of course temporary, and it is incomplete, right? That is the very nature of that material happiness that we get. But here Srila Sutta Goswami is saying that the perfect occupational duty in which every individual, Savai Pumsam, or the entire mankind should engage themselves is that which can give complete satisfaction, right? Suprasidati. And to who? To Atma, to the actual self, right? As we all know that who we actually are, there are many layers to us, right? There is this material body, the material covering, which is temporary, and who we actually are is actually Atma or eternal, right? So there is some satisfaction of the senses because the material body has got so many senses, right? It is made out of earth, water, fire, air, ether. Those are the gross elements. And then there are subtle elements, right? Mind, intelligence, and ego. Bhumi rapo nalo vayu kham man buddhi evacha ahankar itiyam mein bhinna prakriti ashtada, Krishna says, right? So bhumi apo nalo vayu kham man buddhi evacha ahankar. These 8 Krishna describes as his inferior energy, right? Earth, water, fire, air, ether. These 5 are gross elements. And then man, buddhi, and ahankar, right? Mind, intelligence, and ego. These 3 are the subtle elements, right? So all of these 8 comprise the inferior energy of the Supreme Lord. Right? So bhumir apo nalo vayu kham man buddhi revacha ahankar itiyam me bhinna prakriti ashtada. So these 8 are my separated energies, Krishna is saying. But he says aparayam itasta anyam prakriti vidhi me param jiva bhuta mahabhavu yadam dharite jagat. But beyond these 8, aparayam itasta anyam, there is another energy of mind, which is the superior energy. Prakriti vidhi me param. Right? So word para, like here also we see the word para is used, right? Paro dharmo, right? Which is sublime, as Prabhupada gives the definition, right? So para means that is beyond this material energy of Krishna, right? So beyond this material energy of Krishna, there is a superior energy of Krishna. And what is that superior energy? Aparayam itastanyam prakriti vidhi me param jiva bhuta mahabaho ya idam dharite yoga. So that's jiva bhuta, or the living entities, or the Atma, right? So who we actually are, we are beyond those 8 inferior energy of the Supreme Lord. So we can see that there are 3 layers to us. One, the first layer is this gross body that is made up of the 5 gross elements, earth, water, fire, and ether. And then we have all of those senses that are associated with this gross material body. And we engage these material senses into all kinds of, modes of material nature. There are 3 modes of material nature, as we all know: goodness, passion, and ignorance. So everything material, outside or external, is comprised actually with these 3 modes, right? And we try to engage our senses with various objects of sense gratification that is also made out of these 3 modes. So what happens is that these 3 modes, as Prabhupada is also indicating in this purport, we have to understand the nature of happiness that we get in this material world, right? So when we engage our senses with the objects of sense gratification, what we actually doing is that we are trying to satisfy a misery, right? So what happens is that these 3 modes of material nature, they interact with our senses and they create some kind of a disturbance, right? Because of our identification with these modes of material nature and with the body, material body, we tend to get a sense of identity. We identify ourselves with this body, right? And when we do that, immediately we engage with the 3 modes of material nature, right? And because of that engagement, there is a disturbance that gets created in the senses, right? So when we contemplate on the objects of sense gratification, that creates some kind of a disturbance. It's like an itch, right? When we get an itch on any part of our body, right? And when we scratch that itch, right, that gives some kind of a satisfaction, some kind of a happiness, right? But we cannot really call it the true happiness, right? Why? Because it is simply cessation of the disturbance that got created on a portion of my skin, right? So once that itch ceases to exist, right, and the process of satisfying that itch gives us some kind of a satisfaction. But as soon as that itch is gone, right, that disturbance is gone, we stop feeling that pleasure in it, right? So that is a very, very easy way for us to identify the nature of this happiness that we experience in this material world. And you can imagine, you can extrapolate it and imagine any kind of happiness that comes to your mind, right? Whether it is by eating good food, right? For example, if you are really craving for something sweet, right? And somehow someone brings a nice dessert in front of you, right? So of course, because you have that craving for eating something sweet, you start eating that dessert. You will eat, one portion size, second portion size, but by the time you reach the third portion size, you will experience that the kind of happiness or the satisfaction that you got when you were consuming the first portion, the third portion fails to give you that same kind of a satisfaction, right? Why is that? Again, the same idea comes into play, right? So by engagement with this modes of material nature, there was a certain kind of an itch that got created at the sensory level, and that required that desert to be fed, right? And once that desert was fed and that disturbance was stopped, there is no happiness, no more happiness that exists in it, right? And same goes for the sexual or sensual pleasure, pretty much everything that you can think of in this material world. Similarly, when you are really craving, for example, to buy a nice car, right? Let's say you have a very small car right now and you really want a big, nice luxury car. You're really craving for it, right? So you are contemplating on it, create some kind of a disturbance. Then you go into the market and buy that car. But you would notice that after a certain point, right? Maybe you can enjoy it for a month or two, but then beyond that, it stops giving you that same kind of a satisfaction. Right? So we have to understand the nature of the happiness that we get by engaging our senses in the objects of sense gratification, right? So that's called material happiness. And this material happiness is nothing but basically the cessation or the stopping of that misery or disturbance that gets created by indulging our senses in the objects of sense gratification. And therefore, we can understand that that is actually not the happiness itself, right? That is actually not pleasure or bliss. It is simply cessation of a misery, right? But what we actually are, right? The true self, we are actually seeking the actual happiness, the true bliss, right? And the nature of that bliss is the total opposite of the nature of the happiness that we get in this material world, right? So the nature of the happiness in this material world is that it is, of course, ephemeral, or, it is short-lived. It can give you some satisfaction for just, some amount of time, but then it stops giving you happiness. And the other nature of it is it can never completely satisfy you, right? So for example, if you eat dessert and you're craving for something sweet, that might satisfy you to a certain extent. But if you're thirsty, right, that sweet will not be able to satisfy your thirst at the same time, right? So you will have to pursue another object, which is water, in order to satisfy your thirst, right? So you understand that by consuming the dessert, you cannot quench your thirst. And similarly, by consuming water, you cannot satisfy your hunger for a dessert, right? So those are two different things altogether, right? So the nature of the satisfaction that we get by engaging our material senses in the sense objects is that that satisfaction is incomplete. It is not all encompassing, and it is ephemeral or short-lived. Whereas the eternal happiness that we get by engaging in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord is transcendental, and its nature is that it is eternal and it is complete, right? So it can satisfy us completely. And that is why we see that Srila Suta Goswami is using the term Suprasidati. Suprasidati means complete and eternal. And that is the kind of happiness that all of us are looking for, right? So the first line tells us what is it, what kind of occupation should we really engage in, right? Which is the most pertinent question. And what would be the outcome when we engage in that perfect occupation or that parodharmo, right? That transcendental occupation. The outcome will be that it will give us complete and eternal satisfaction, right? And when we think of whatever occupations we are engaged from a material standpoint today, the objective is the same, right? We want satisfaction, but they are not able to give us that complete satisfaction, right? So the first is what occupation should we do, and the last statement gives us why we should do that, and that makes complete sense. Now, how can we achieve that? That's the next important question, right? So that is described in the second one, the second line, right? So yato bhaktir adhokshaje. So that occupation is engaging oneself into the activity that will bring us closer to the Supreme Lord, right? That can help us to attain the loving devotional service unto the transcendental Lord, right? So that is the kind of occupation that we should do. So here's the answer, right? So the transcendental occupation that can give us complete and eternal satisfaction is the one, that activity that will result in us developing the loving devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, right? And then the next question is, what kind of devotional service? Will just any kind of devotional service or engaging in the service of the Supreme Lord work, or there is a specific quality of that engagement that we should pursue, right? So that is answered in the third line, ahetuki and apratihata, right? The nature is described here, and the duration, right? When, the answer of the when is also there, right? Ahetuki means unmotivated, right, or unconditional, and apratihata means unbroken, right? So ahetuki, Prabhupada gives us the meaning causeless. So without any motivation, or without any motives, or without any cause, that's the meaning of ahetuki. And apratihata means unbroken. Unbroken means constant, right? So we have to engage in the activity that can engage us in the loving devotional service of the Supreme Lord, and it can engage us in a way that is unmotivated or without any cause, and it is constant, right? So the constant and unmotivational engagement in the service of the Supreme Lord is the occupation that we should pursue, and the outcome will be that we will be completely and eternally satisfied. So that is the understanding that Srila Suta Goswami, right at the very beginning of Bhagavatam, right, as he starts to answer these questions, he gives us this verse, right? So if a person just stops here and doesn't go anywhere else, even this verse, right, if one meditates on this verse, gives us the complete understanding of the complete knowledge of the perfect knowledge, right? The entire Vedic purport is right here in this verse, and that's why I like this verse so much, right? So now here, a couple of points that Srila Suta Goswami is making, right? Ahaituki and apratihata, right? So sometimes, we tend to engage in Krishna consciousness, and we understand that, we have to chant our 16 rounds, we have to read Prabhupada books, right? But, we could do that for, let's say, a couple of hours every day or 3 hours every day, or, we can spend some more time over the weekend. But it is also important to understand that Krishna consciousness is not a part-time job, right? It's not a part-time activity. As Srila Suta Goswami is saying here, apratihata, right? It should be unbroken or constant. And we see at many places in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also emphasizes this aspect of satatam, right? Of constant engagement in Krishna consciousness. Ananyas chintayantu mam ye jana pariyupasate tesham nitya abhyuktanam yogashema mahamyam, Krishna says, right? So nitya abhyukt, even in this verse we see, nitya abhyukt. Nit means constant and abhyukt means engagement, right? So constant engagement is something that Krishna has highlighted all over the place in Bhagavad Gita. Satatam kirtayantu mam ye jana pariyupasate, right? Satatam again means constant, right? So ananya, no one else but Krishna, and constant engagement in Krishna consciousness. That is highlighted almost everywhere, right? So the question then comes, how can we constantly engage in Krishna consciousness, right? What should we really do that we can constantly engage in Krishna consciousness? And it is very important for us as devotees who are serious towards pursuing Krishna consciousness to understand that, right? So that is only possible if we dovetail our lives, right? If we kind of manage our lives in such a way that even when we are engaged in our day-to-day activities, right, in our day-to-day routine activities, in such a way that we can be engaged in Krishna consciousness even when we are engaged in those activities, right? And Krishna, actually, Prabhupada very nicely here towards the beginning of the second paragraph explains this, right? So Prabhupada here is saying that we have purposely denoted dharma as occupation because the root meaning of the word dharma is that which sustains one's existence, right? So dharma or the occupation is that which sustains our existence, right? So a living being's sustenance of existence is to coordinate his activities with his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord Krishna, right? So this is very, very important. And Prabhupada explains this very, very beautifully, that Krishna should be the central pivot of our entire lives, right? And we have to coordinate our activities in such a way that we can relish and basically associate those activities in terms of our eternal relation with the Supreme Lord, right? So whatever, no matter what kind of activity we do, we have to do it in a way and with the understanding that we are doing that for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, right? So for example, we are engaged in a 9 to 5 job, right? And the primary objective is so that we can make some money out of it. And then we can serve our family members, right? Our immediate responsibilities, like our wives and our children. So, one way to do that is, you just go out, make a livelihood, and you are just feeding them. And you are thinking that, I am the one who's taking care of them. I'm the one who has to sustain them. I'm the one who is responsible for them, right? So let me go out, make a living, earn some money, and we consider ourselves to be the doer, right? We think that we are the ones who are making this money, and we are basically responsible for taking care of my family members, right? That is one way of thinking. But the other way of thinking is that Krishna has provided us, a wife and these kids as a responsibility, and we are responsible for them on behalf of Krishna. Actually, they belong to Krishna, but in this life, Krishna has given a certain responsibility to take care of them, and therefore we are taking care of them on behalf of Krishna, right? So the action does not really change. The action stays the same. We go out, engage in our day-to-day routine activities, and we make a living. But the motivation now has changed, right? The motivation is because Krishna has given us this responsibility, let me work to the best of my ability so that I can satisfy the responsibility that has been given to me by Krishna. Right? Just like Arjun, right? Arjun was fighting the war, and on the other hand, Duryodhan was also fighting the same war, right? There is no difference in the act itself. The act is that of fighting the war, right? But the motivation was different, right? In the case of Duryodhan, the motivation was that I want to enjoy this material kingdom, right? Whatever material kingdom I would gain by winning this war, I will be the enjoyer. That was the motivation of Duryodhan. Whereas in the case of Arjun, the motivation was because Krishna wants me to fight this war, as he has very clearly indicated. I will therefore fight the war for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, right? Because Krishna is the proprietor of this material creation, and he comes from time to time to establish the religious principles. And these people who are on the other side, they are not really religious, and if they are allowed to win this war, they will spread irreligion all over this material creation, right? So in order for me, because I'm a Kshatriya and I'm duty bound to protect the religious principles on behalf of the Supreme Lord, right? It is very important for us to understand that Krishna is the ultimate proprietor. Bhoktaram yagya tapasam sarvalok maheshwaram suhridam sarvabhutanam yatva mam shantirichati, Krishna says. So Krishna is the ultimate proprietor. Matta partaram nannet kinchit asti dhananjaya mahi idam sarvam protam sutre manigraniva. So Krishna, because he is the ultimate proprietor, therefore he is the one who is responsible for the well-being of this creation and all of the living entities that stay in this material world. And therefore, one of the reasons that he gives, yada yada hi dharmasya glaner bhavati bharata, abhyudanam adharmasya tadatmanam srajamyaham, right? So whenever there is a widespread of irreligion, wherever in this material creation, Krishna says that I come here personally to establish the religious principles, right? So Krishna is primarily responsible for establishing the religious principles in this material world, right? Because he is the ultimate proprietor. And Arjun, because he is a Kshatriya, his propensity is to fight, right? So Krishna has created these four varnas, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, based on various propensities that we have. Chaturvarnyam maya shishtam guna karma vibhagasha. So based on our propensities, based on the various gunas that we have, right, or the various propensities that we have, we need to engage in one of these four varnas, right? Some people, they are really after knowledge, right? They are very, very intelligent and they want to gather knowledge. They want to become more and more knowledgeable, right? So their guna is that they want to collect knowledge, right? So they fall in the Brahman category. Then there are some people who have a fighting nature, right? They are very, very passionate and they want to fight. So instead of just fighting for the destruction, instead the objective is that they should engage their fighting spirit for the protection of the religious principles, right? And Arjuna belonged to that category, right? So one understanding is that because I have to follow this varna and I'm a Kshatriya, I should fight this war for establishing the religious principles. That is one understanding, right? That is also a good understanding, but it is not a perfect understanding, right? The perfect understanding, which Srila Suta Goswami is talking here, because he is very clearly saying, right, whatever occupation you do, ultimately it should help you to develop the love of Krishna, right? That is the perfect occupation, right? So if I just simply think that, or Arjuna simply thought that because I'm a Kshatriya and I need to fight to establish the religious principles, that is good, but it is not good enough. But what his motivation was, that because Krishna wants me to fight, and why does Krishna wants him to fight? Because Krishna is the proprietor of this material creation, and because one of the responsibilities of Krishna is to establish the religious principles, I can become an instrument. Although Krishna does not really need me, he has got so many people who could do that on his behalf, and he does not even need anyone, right? Just by thinking, he can immediately establish all the religious principles in this material world. But because he likes to play and he likes to engage his devotees in his service, right? For the very reason that by engaging in his service, the living entities can attain perfection, right? So therefore, Arjuna is thinking that because Krishna wants me to fight and he wants me to engage in his service of establishing the religious principles, and because this is one of my gunas that I have a fighting propensity, let me engage my nature to fight in establishing the religious principles on behalf of Krishna, right? So by that understanding, he made that same activity of fighting the war, he transformed it into Krishna conscious. So although we can see that physically he is not engaged in chanting, or physically he is not engaged in reading about Krishna, but because he is following the instructions of Krishna and the actions that he is doing with the understanding that they are meant to satisfy Krishna. That same action has now become Krishna consciousness, or the activity, or the parodharmo that Suta Goswami is talking here, right? So this is very, very important for us to understand that whatever activities that we do in this material world, we have to understand that the objective, or we have to do those with the sense that they are meant for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. And because Krishna is the supreme proprietor of everyone and everything, our actions should, whatever actions we do, because whatever activities we are engaged in, whatever jobs we do, for example, if I work for a bank, the bank is serving a very important purpose of, tracking the finances of so many of the customers that the bank has, right? So that is one of the services that the bank is rendering. And I play a particular role in the organization, right? So in a way, I am serving the customers who are being served by the bank, right? So I am kind of rendering some kind of a service in this material world to make this material world a better place. But just to think that I have to play this role in making this world a better place to live, right? So that is the notion that most of the political establishment and the world leaders go with, and they stop there. They do not go beyond that, right? So that is a good thinking, and that will definitely result in basically moving our consciousness to the next level. But that is a very, very slow process. The perfect process, and particularly in this in the age of Kali Yuga, when we are really, really short-lived, we do not really have very long lives. The perfect understanding is actually beyond that. Why do I need to engage for the well-being of this material creation, for the well-being of this material world? That is because that will satisfy Krishna, right? And it also helps us not to be puffed up, right? Because if we just think that, I'm doing such a great job, uh, for the benefit of the material world, so that I can play a productive role in making this world a better place, right? Somehow or the other, this notion that I can improve the situation of this material world, that pride comes into us, right? And when that pride comes, it basically reinforces the idea that I am the doer and that I am the creator. Actually, Krishna is the supreme creator and he's the proprietor. But by thinking that I am the doer, we kind of make this disease more acute, that thinking that I am the doer, right? So although it may be a good beginning, but it is not the perfect occupation that Srila Sutta Goswami is talking here. Right? So we have to understand that we are contributing in this material world in a positive way. That is good. But there are so many other people who can do that, right? And Krishna actually does not even need anyone to make this world a better place. Just by thinking, he can make this world a perfect place. He can make it Vaikuntha, whatever, whenever he wants, right? So we should not think ourselves to be the doer, but we should understand that the actions that we do, they are ultimately for the benefit of the material creation of the Supreme Lord. And when we do anything for the benefit of anyone who lives in this material creation or for this material creation, that actually satisfies Krishna. And because that satisfies Krishna, that automatically becomes that same activity that we did, that automatically becomes Krishna consciousness, right? So it's basically the same as engaging in chanting or engaging in any kind of other services, right? So basically that same action becomes a Krishna conscious action, and that is how we can basically 24/7 stay Krishna conscious, right? So these are very subtle things that we need to understand. And if we practice sufficiently, right, through practice, we can perfect this understanding. And by practice, once we perfect this understanding, we can stay Krishna conscious 24/7. And that is one of the primary requirements, as has been stated in this verse, right? And the other one is unmotivated, right? So, as Krishna says, there are 4 types of people who come into Krishna consciousness, right? Chaturvida bhajante mam. There are 4 kinds of people, right? Artho, Jigyasu, Artharthi, and Jnani, right? So one who is distressed, one who is inquisitive, right? He wants to understand what's going on, right? The third one is the one who wants to make some money, right? Wealth, the one who is seeking the wealth. Artho, Jigyasu, Artharthi, and Jnani, right? The 4th category and the one who is most beloved to the Supreme Lord are those who are genuinely seeking the absolute, right? What is the real absolute, right? So these 4 types of people come to Krishna, and not just anyone. Janana Sukritino Arjuna, Krishna says, right? Chaturvida bhajante mam. Jana Sukritino Arjuna, right? So the one who has got a sufficient amount of pious deeds or pious activities, right? Not just anyone, but the one who has done sufficient amount of good activities in his previous lives, they get motivated to pursue Krishna consciousness, right? But that's where the beginning is. Ultimately, we have to come to a stage where our engagement in Krishna consciousness is actually unmotivated, or we do it just for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, right? And that is the stage, that is the kind of Krishna consciousness, or that is the kind of parodharmo that Sutta Goswami is telling us to pursue, right? So in the beginning, as a motivation for us to come to Krishna, it is okay. But gradually, as we become more and more mature in Krishna consciousness, we should understand that ultimately, whatever material objectives we may have when we came, just like Dhruv Maharaj, right? He came into Krishna consciousness and he started to pursue the worship of the Supreme Lord because he wanted to be the king, right? He wanted the kingdom of his father. But gradually, after receiving instructions from Narad Muni, when ultimately Krishna appeared in front of him, he did not really need anything, right? He was totally purified. So that is the nature of bhakti, or the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Although initially a devotee may be motivated, he may have some material motivations, but as we pursue the devotional service of the Supreme Lord, gradually anartha nivritti takes place, right? And all of these propensities in our hearts to enjoy material nature, they gradually dissipate from our heart, and gradually this understanding and that supreme kind of a satisfaction, which we call the satisfaction that comes by pursuing the devotional service, right? The eternal satisfaction comes into our heart, and as that comes, gradually we become more and more fixed up in Krishna consciousness, right? So ahaituki and apratihata, right? These two terms are very, very important here again. Right. So basically, to summarize, the ultimate satisfaction, every living entity is basically looking for some sort of happiness, right? And the kind of happiness that we get in this material world is temporary. But what we actually want is the complete and eternal satisfaction, right? That can only be attained by pursuing the devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, unto Adhokshaj or Krishna. And that too we can understand because we are part and parcels of the Supreme Lord. And because the Supreme Lord himself, Krishna, he is Satchidananda Vigraha and Adiradir Govinda Sarva Karan Karanam, right? So Satchidananda Vigraha means he is the form of Sat, Chit and Anand. Sat means eternal, Chit means complete, full of knowledge, and Anand means bliss, right? So we are all seeking this bliss because Krishna is completely blissful. And because we are part and parcels of the Supreme Lord, Mamaivaamsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, Manasasthani Indriyani Prakriti Sthani Karshati. Right? So Mam Ev Ansh, we are all part and parcels of the Supreme Lord. And because we are part and parcels of the complete bliss, we are always seeking that complete bliss, right? And that is the reason why we are seeking that complete bliss. And therefore we can get that only by associating ourselves back with the Supreme Lord, by engaging ourselves again in the service of the Supreme Lord. There is no other way for us to do that, right? So here, that's what Srila Sutta Goswami is saying, that somehow or the other, we have to plan our lives in such a way that we can stay Krishna conscious 24/7. And that activity that brings us closer to this realization that I am the servant of the Supreme Lord, that is the ultimate or the topmost occupation that we should all engage in. So I will stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.
So Abhiram Prabhu,
Hare Krishna Mataji.
how can you plan your life in such a way that you're thinking of Krishna 24/7? Sometimes our material problems become so colossal, they seem to like swallow us in,
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good point, Mataji. I mean, it's easier said than done, right? So what Srila Sutta Goswami is talking about here and what we just discussed, that is the ultimate platform where we have to come, right? As Arjuna says, it is easy for me to control the wind, but I cannot control my mind, right? And then in response to that, Krishna says, Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena chakriyate, right? By practice, through abhyas, if we are actually motivated to pursue Krishna consciousness 24/7, right? And all we are thinking about is somehow or the other, we can completely engage ourselves in the service of the Supreme Lord. Then gradually what happens is when we are constantly thinking about it, we reach that stage through practice, right? So just like, the one example that I gave, I'm going out, doing my job, coming back, and the motivation could be to make money. That money, I can basically take care of my family. But if I think that I am taking care of this family not for myself, but because they are a responsibility given to me by the Supreme Lord, right? So I need to do this responsibility for the satisfaction of Krishna. Right? So the motivation is now satisfaction of, although the action is the same. I'm making the money and basically taking care of my children and my wife. The act is the same, but the motivation is I'm doing it for the satisfaction of the Lord, right? And when we constantly think that way, gradually we can realize that we are gradually purified, right? Gradually this purification purification process takes place or anartha nivritti happens, and then we can spontaneously be Krishna consciousness. Just like we are currently spontaneously materially conscious, right? So as soon as some problem comes into our lives, we forget all about Krishna consciousness, right? But when gradually we practice, we'll come to a stage where we can spontaneously be Krishna consciousness. That's the ruchi stage, right? When we have the ruchi, at that stage we are consciously, spontaneously Krishna conscious. And if there is any interruption to that Krishna conscious, we become disturbed, right? So just like today, Krishna consciousness seems a disturbance to us, like chanting in our 24 hours a day. If we chant 2 hours, that seems like a disturbance in our day-to-day material engagements. Gradually, when we practice, we will come to a stage where these material disturbances actually disturbance, because we are spontaneously always want to engage in the service of the Supreme Lord. So I think, in a nutshell, the idea is practice through the right consciousness.
Mhm. Until then, sometimes it looks like we're taking 2 steps forwards and 1 step backward all the time.
Yes, absolutely. That's very true. And that happens to all of us, right? And that's why, Prabhupada has given us such a strong program. Like these days, every morning we engage in a morning program where we chant beautiful Brahma Samhita prayers. We chant our rounds in association of the devotees. Then we chant the Narsinga prayer, Tulsi prayer. Then we discuss a little bit about Bhagavad Gita, right? So that kind of becomes, like a power pack in the morning. That that power in the engagement and the association of the devotees, that energy flows through us, and then that should be good enough for us to stay Krishna conscious at least for one day. And then uh, on weekends we have these Sunday feast programs where unfortunately because of the pandemic we are not able to go, but during the normal times, hopefully soon, we will start to physically go into the temple and take darshans of the deities, take their Charnamrita, physically associate with the devotees, right? So this entire program, has been created and provided to us by our acharyas and so nicely established by Srila Prabhupada. So that is particularly provided for us to give us that spiritual strength so that we can do that abhyas, that practice, that how can I stay in that consciousness 24/7. And it's a gradual process, right? No one can expect it to have it suddenly. Therefore, this anartha nivritti process is what takes the most amount of time, right? If you look at all of the various stages of bhakti, right? Ado, Shraddha, and then we start associating with the devotees, right? And after Bhajan Kriya starts, this Bhajan Kriya and Anartha Nivritti is where most of the time goes, right? So we are engaging. Bhajan Kriya basically means engaging in all of the various aspects of devotional service. And when we do that, Anartha Nivritti takes place, right? So we engage sometimes and then some purification is happening. Then, so that back and forth kind of that process takes a lot of time. But once we are sincere, and particularly if we have this mood to serve our spiritual master sincerely and follow the instructions and associate with the devotees, if we do that sincerely, the process itself is very, very potent. And eventually it will lead us to a stage where, Anartha Nivritti will be more or less done. And then we can reach the stage of Ruchi. And then from there, the next other steps are not so difficult, although we have to be cautious at that point. But this Bhajan Kriya and Anartha Nivritti in the Vaidhi Bhakti, that's basically the most time taking and most tedious process, which takes the most amount of time.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Anyone else, any comments or questions? If not, there is one more point actually which Prabhupada here is talking about, which is, the Pravritti Marg and the Nivritti Marg, right? So in the Vedas, there are these two types of occupations that have been prescribed for the human being. So this Pravritti Marg is usually what has been prescribed in, Karma Kanda as well, right? So, and the the part where I was talking about this material world, most of the political leaders, they do not really like to talk about Krishna or serving the Lord. They simply stop at this aspect wherein, we have to make this world a better place to live, right? So that is not really bad, but that basically stops at this pravritti marg, right? So that's basically the epitome of the pravritti marg. That's where it stops. So if one is sincerely engaged just with the motivation that I have to make this world a better place to live, it's basically a very, very gradual process wherein he will purify his pravritti, right? So instead of thinking about, how to keep myself happy at the expense of everyone else, that's the lowest kind of mentality. From that, at least we can get to this mentality that, I have to contribute in a positive way to this material world. But that still is in the pravritti mark. If we actually want nivritti, or if we want to go beyond, this cycle of birth and death, we really have to come to that platform where we think that we have to play this productive role in this material world. But why do we have to do that? That's because we want to satisfy the Supreme Lord, and because Supreme Lord is the proprietor of everything, and he is always thinking about the well-being of all living entities. I want to play a productive role here because that will result in the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. When we think that, that's actually where the Nivritti Marga starts, right? And that will actually result in us getting beyond the cycle of birth and death. So there is a very important distinction that Prabhupada is making here. I just wanted to highlight that while we had a couple of minutes. Anyone else, any final thoughts, comments, or questions? Okay, if not, we'll get ready for, I know there is 1 minute left for Aarti to start, and I'll be leading the Kirtan today. So let me just set up the Kirtan so that we can get started with that. Thank you all so much. We'll pay obeisances to all the assembled Vaishnavas. Vancha kalpataru bhascha kripa sindhu vicha patita nam pavane pyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you all for listening to me so patiently. Hare Krishna. We'll now start with the Aarti. Shri Shri Jagannath Baldev Subhadra Maiya ki jai. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ki bajaya jaya Gaura Chande Aarti ka shobha. Ki bajaya jaya Gaura Chande Aarti ka shobha. Jaha vitata bane jagamana lobha. Jaha vitata bane jagamana lobha. Dakhine nitai chan Bame Gadadhara. Dakhine nitai chan Bame Gadadhara. Nikate Advaita Shini Vasachhatradhara. Nikate Advaita Shini Vasachhatradhara. Vasi Ache Gauracha বসিয়াছে গৌরাচান রত্ন সিংহাসনে आरती करे ना ब्रह्मा आदि देव गाने आरती करे ना ब्रह्मा आदि देव गाने नरहरि आदि कोरी चामर ढुलाया नरहरि आदि कोरी चामर ढुलाया संजय मुकुंद वासु घोषाधिकाया संजय मुकुंद वासु घोषाधिकाया शंखा बाजे घंटा बाजे बाजे करताल शंखा बाजे घंटा बाजे बाजे करताल माधुरा मृदंगा बाजे परम रसाला माधुरा मृदंगा बाजे परम रसाला शंख बाजे घंटा बाजे माधुर माधुर बाजे शंख बाजे घंटा बाजे माधुर 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 बाजे शंख बाजे घंटा बाजे माधुर 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 बाजे शंख बाजे घंटा बाजे माधुर 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 बाजे नित्य गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल किम बहु कोटि चंद्रजिनी वदन उज्ज्वल बहु कोटि चंद्रजिनी वदन उज्ज्वल गला देशे वनमाला कोरे झलमाला गला देशे वनमाला कोरे झलमाला शिवा शुक नारद प्रेम कदम शिवा शुक नारद प्रेम गदगद नमः ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने नमः ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hari Haraya Nama, Krishna Yadavaya Nama, 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 Yadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya नयन पथगामी भव तुम्हें
जगन्नाथ स्वामी नयन पथगामी भव तुम्हें
जगन्नाथ स्वामी नयन पथगामी भव तुम्हें
जगन्नाथ स्वामी नयन पथगामी भव तुम्हें
हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण
हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय जगन्नाथ जय बलदेवा जय सुभद्रा
जय जगन्नाथ जय बलदेवा जय सुभद्रा
जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय
जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय
जय राधा श्याम सुंदर राधे
जय राधा श्याम सुंदर राधे
जय राधा पार्थ सारथी राधे
जय राधा पार्थ सारथी राधे
जय राधा कुंज बिहारी राधे
जय राधा कुंज बिहारी राधे
जय किशोर किशोरी जय किशोर किशोरी जय किशोर किशोरी जय किशोर किशोरी
जय किशोर किशोरी जय किशोर किशोरी जय किशोर किशोरी जय किशोर किशोरी
जय सीताराम लक्ष्मण हनुमान सीताराम लक्ष्मण हनुमान
जय सीताराम लक्ष्मण हनुमान सीताराम लक्ष्मण हनुमान
जय गिरि गोवर्धन जय गिरि गोवर्धन
जय गिरि गोवर्धन जय गिरि गोवर्धन
जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह
जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह
जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद
जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद
जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद
Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabrajakacarya Sotara Sata Shri Sridhar Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parabrajakacarya Sotara Sata Shri Sridhar Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Shila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasili Gaura Bhaktavinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopi Gopinath Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Ganga Mahi Ki Jai, Jamuna Mahi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai, Shrimati Tulsi Maharani ki jai, Lord Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra Devi ki jai, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai, Lord Nrsimha Deva ki jai, Shri Shalagram Shilas ki jai, Shri Giriraj Maharaj ki jai, Samaveta Bhaktavinda ki jai, Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Garanga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Namaste Narashingaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Praladaladarine.
Praladaladaine.
Hiranyakashipurvaksha.
Hiranyakashipurvakshaha.
Shilatankanakaraye.
Shilatankanakalaye.
Hito Nashingo Bharato Nashingo.
Sito Narshingo Parato Narshingo.
Yato Yato Yamitato Nashingo.
Yato Yato Yamitato Narshingo.
Bahir Nashinga Hidaye Nashinga.
Bahir Narshinga Hridaye Narshinga.
Narishinga Madhim Sharanam Prapate.
Narasimha Madhim Sharanam Prapade.
Karakara Kamala Vare Napa Adhuta Shringaya Kalita Hiranyakashipu Tanalenga Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare.
Tava kara kamala vare nakha adbhuta shringa dalita hiranyakashipu tanobrenga keshavadrita narahari rupa Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare.
Jayo Narshingadev, Jayo Narshingadev, Narshingadev, Jayo Narshingadev.
Jayo Narsingadev, Jayo Narsingadev, Narsingadev, Jayo Narsingadev.
Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj.
Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj.
Jayo Jayo Prabhupada, 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 Jayo Jayo Prabhupada.
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Jayo Jayo Gurudev, 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 Jayo Jayo Gurudev.
Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev.
Nitai Gora Haribo, 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 Nitai Gora Haribo.
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Narshingadev Bhagwan ki.
Jai Bhaktaraj Prahlad Maharaj ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for our Sunday program this evening. Our sponsors for today, Ganapati Govind Prabhuji, Radha Priti Mataji, and Dhruv are sponsoring for Vrinda's and Tulsi's birthday. And Mahadana Mataji, Jack Prabhuji, and Srinath Prabhuji are sponsoring for Radha Kunda, who would have been 45 years old on June 15th. Sadly, she passed away when she was 11 years old. Hari Bol. And if anyone is interested in sponsoring, you can be one of our Sunday program sponsors for only $125. And you may contact His Grace Pyare Mohan Prabhuji or Her Grace Shiva Mataji at our temple phone number. ISKCON Connecticut book distribution initiatives that are currently ongoing include Srimad Bhagavatam distribution for Bhadra campaign, as well as Srila Prabhupada Lilamrit on the 125th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada's appearance. And if anyone is interested, you may contact Ganapati Govind Prabhuji for more details. To get details about our regular online programs, what you see on your screen is a quick snapshot of the same, and you can find all of the details on our temple website, and the participation details on Zoom are also included therein. And now we will have more chanting for our sponsors. Hare Krishna.
Damasan, can you hear me? Haribol Prabhu, can you hear me?
Yes, Chaitanya. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare Bol. Hare Krishna.
Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ganapati Govind Prabhuji, Radha Priti Mataji, Dhruv, Vrinda and Tulsi ki jai. Mahadana Mataji, Jack Prabhuji, Srinath Prabhuji, Radha Kund ki jai. Thank you very much, everyone. With that, we are going to conclude our Sunday program for today. Thank you very much for joining once again. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol.